Hi, I'm Patrick Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to this show is that Favro customers are some of the most innovative companies in the world. Enterprises wanting to be more agile, software as a service companies scaling fast, and game developers and publishers wanting to master LiveOps. So we get to know some truly inspiring leaders in product development, marketing, operations, sales, executive management. And what we do here is that we interview them about leadership so we can all learn from them. Let's go.
And we are live with another Patrick. I've been having a podcast before that you might have seen with Tommy Palm. So then it was the same family name, even though we're not related as far as we know. And today, I'm here with Patrick, but I think you normally go more by Pat, right?
Yeah, usually, unless you're my mother or something.
All right, cool. Well, I'm going to stick to Pat then, so I don't get into the category of mother, even though I'm sure she's amazing. So we have an interesting conversation today. We had a little chat before, talking about, crisis management in game productions, and we're going to get a little bit more into that. But let's start with just a bit on your story, because I don't think everyone knows you who's listening. And, one way is simply to just look at someone's, LinkedIn, or just kind of like walk through their resume. But I would love to hear kind of like, your kind of more personal story, like, what brought you to what you do today?
Oh, yeah. So I've been making games for probably about 23 years now. Started off in engineering back at BioWare back in the day, so I was in engineering roles for a long time.
Well, which games did you work on at BioWare? Because I think there's a lot of fans here.
I worked on Jade Empire, Mass Effect, the Dragon Age games, a couple canceled projects as well that didn't see the light of day. And and at around like 2010 or so, I was always the guy that the engineers would send to talk to artists or designers back in the day, so I thought that was fun. But as I progressed in my career, I found that I cared more about how the team was functioning and working together, and how they were kind of executing and accomplishing goals, and the actual like coding and engineering stuff itself. So in 2010, I kind of flipped over to the full dark side of production. And that was actually on the pilot project when BioWare was evaluating the Frostbite engine that DICE was making. And that's when I kind of realized that, okay, I could leave coding and everything behind and just kind of focus on this for the rest of my career. And since then, I've been doing that in various roles. So at startups, but also at larger AAA companies. So I worked at a few startups locally here in Canada. I also worked at an NFT startup way back in 2018 called Engine, built that team up there. We did some great things. And in that time also, we lived in Europe. So we lived in Europe for about 4 or 5 years. So I worked at IO Interactive, I worked at Massive, and my last gig was at Remedy Entertainment in Finland as lead producer of Alan Wake 2. And then we ended up coming back because of COVID and personal stuff, and everybody's getting older and the kids are getting older. So now I'm back in Canada working at Galaxy.
And, when I was speaking with you before, when we were connected, by, one of our account managers who's responsible, for you as a client, I was just looking on LinkedIn, I was like, holy moly, like we have so many common connections.
Yeah.
But it makes sense, when with the kind of companies you've been at, it's not so strange that that we have so many common connections, because the game industry is in many ways very big and very fast growing and all that, but in one way it's also kind of a very small but highly international community.
Indeed, yeah. I meet people all the time. Even in my current role, didn't think I'd meet people, but actually I met people that worked at DICE just a couple weeks ago that I didn't know from before, but that we had common connections, and it's really cool.
Yeah. And I want to give you the opportunity to just say a few things about Gala Games. You just for the ones who doesn't know what you do. So just a little bit of like your current stuff.
Yeah, so my current role is lead producer on a fantasy MMO called Mirandus, which is being built by Gala Games. As it's kind of your traditional, a little bit old school EverQuest type MMO. We're kind of going back to basics, and of course, Gala being a NFT company, we are incorporating that sort of technology into our game. But that being said, it's a game studio first, so we're actually creating the game, and then we're seeing how the technology can work into it afterwards. So that's our approach with that.
All right, cool. So let's get into the meat of the conversation today. I'm very eager. So, you kind of coined the term, crisis-driven development. And I guess the conversation is, how do we avoid it? So we need to start with some definitions. I mean, can you just share a couple of kind of battle stories, or what crisis-driven development really means?
Yeah, so what crisis-driven development means to me is when usually leadership of a project kind of comes down and tries to shock the team into completion urgency with an unrealistic deadline or a demo or something. Usually it's kind of like your traditional E3 demo, or we got this trade, so that sounds like a good opportunity to kind of shock the team into completion urgency, and going, usually it's with a fixed scope and also timeline, so there's not much flexibility. It's kind of meant to kind of be a little bit unattainable for the team to achieve that. Yeah, and usually the reason why they do that is because frequently game leadership, they always want to know when the game's going to ship. They operate more in a kind of a waterfall fashion, and if they see on the whatever's happening on the shop floor is not lining up with their mental model of where the game should be, sometimes this is one of the kind of techniques that they go to try to get things going, so to speak.
And from your experience, when this is happening, I mean, there's no lack of, death march stories in the game industry for the last 20 years,
No.
or probably even longer. How can you, can you talk a little bit about, the effects? And I actually want to challenge you a little bit, like the bad ones, obviously, but also, maybe are there some good things coming out of this?
Yeah. So, the bad ones are kind of ones that are totally unachievable, and where the team feels like they have no support at all from leadership, and that this is just kind of hopeless and we'll never make it, and there's no kind of support there to help the team achieve those things. I think the positive instances of it is when the goal is really clear that needs to be hit and on time, and the leadership is there to kind of help support the team and in whatever way that they need to achieve those goals. So a good example of this is on Dragon Age, where we had to port Dragon Age Origins, a PC RPG that was built as a PC RPG from the ground up, to the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox in 8 months. And we've never done anything like that before. In that case, it was a fairly healthy thing overall, because the goal was actually clear. We had to ship on these platforms on a given date. We had to be within 5 Metacritic of the PC version of the game. Those were basically our parameters. Outside of that, the team was given carte blanche to assemble whatever they needed and get the support. So some examples of that is we didn't have expertise on PS3. So we actually hired like the ninja team, I forget their name, from Naughty Dog to come and sit with us, with our engineers, for a couple of weeks to help them level up on the gear. And same with just the team makeup. We were basically able to pull people from wherever to get onto the team with like no red tape at all. So stuff like that is what I mean about studio kind of supporting the team when they need to execute.
Yeah, that's a very, very good example, because I think, I think it's important to recognize, both the good and the bad, right? But what's leading a little bit into why I think this conversation with you today is so interesting is that, I mean, if we look at games today, I mean, pretty much everything is LiveOps. There's no room for death march because that would be a Monday death march, because there's like something dropping every week, and you need to keep teams in sync. And I think this is that's kind of like a huge. Well, I should be careful what I say now, but there's definitely some big change that needs to happen. Well, let's put it this way. I mean, from my horizon, I can see there's quite uneven within the game industry, who has started to really adapt to these kind of challenges and who are still stuck in quite old-fashioned ways of thinking, and their life is just going to get more painful for them. And in your case, I believe that you've been having a chance to kind of build, things around team and culture in a way to actually avoid this. And I would love to hear a little bit like, your thoughts, coming into this and like, how to get it right.
Yeah, well, the jury's still out whether we have it actually right or not. But in terms of my time at Gala and the momentum and kind of the morale of the team and kind of where we are in our kind of development journey, we're still technically in pre-production, but we don't really have that. We don't make those distinctions anymore like in old AAA kind of ship games where you have a fixed pre-production and then you have a fixed production and then you ship it. I found in those kind of projects, it doesn't really work very well, the whole thing. Usually you just run out of time and Banner's Fate goes, okay, you're at a pre-production, now you're in production, you got to ship the game in 18 months. So what we're trying at Gala is, not anything too crazy. We're just trying to keep the crises very small and kind of manageable. And that usually involves, just releasing the game on a regular basis and kind of building the DevOps thing right from the beginning, even when we don't really have anything. So for an example, our first release was just a player running around in a environment, a gym, with all our player metrics and everything. And that was our shippable thing for the game.
No, but that's cool. I mean, if we go to like textbook agile, small increments, some high value, and I mean that sounds like a perfect example of that. But can you give some more examples? I mean, some of you are. I mean, what would be if I forced you to give a GDC speech about your production framework, what kind of pillars would that be?
I mean, again, I don't think it's really outside of the kind of agile principles that everybody talks about. It's more about really, I would say, avoid doing things like trying to create long-term waterfall roadmaps that are beyond something I call the BS event horizon, which usually leadership wants those. Avoid that.
Can you say that again? BS event horizon. Did you say that?
The BS event horizon.
Oh gosh, I'm gonna quote that. I'm gonna quote that. That's so good.
When your director goes, I want to know what you guys will be working on in what sequence, in a kind of block diagram or roadmap, like 2 years from now, when you don't even have like a player swinging a sword in your game or something like that. Like that's what I'm talking about. So I would say, spend less time doing those sorts of activities, really dig in. And again, this is like textbook, like agile stuff, like dig in with the teams, get them working on the smallest increment that they could ship and actually ship it. So execute like your shipping process and deployment and everything and do it. And I find that a lot of game teams just really constantly try to put the cart in front of the horse. And if you don't let them do that and just kind of ship the game, then that's one way to do it. The second thing, I guess, would be also to give the teams the flexibility. So if you're doing a release train of every 6 months or 2 months or 1 month, give the team more agency when determining like the work and the scope of things that they're shipping.
How do you make sure that, well, what kind of, I mean, this is a super boring question, you know, coming from a business person here, kind of.
Yeah.
But I mean, what kind of metrics do you use? I mean, because some of these things, I guess, are a little bit metrics driven too, right?
Yeah, I think some of them are. We keep the metrics pretty light. We are very try to be outcome based, so not just look at the output of the team. Really kind of double down, and then, I mean, this is all normal advice that production type people give, is double down on the work and the outcomes that you're delivering to make sure what we're delivering is the right thing. And in terms of metrics, we keep it fairly light, and we measure like throughput, like velocity. We measure how much work the teams signed up for versus what they delivered in a cycle. And most of the metrics, again, are not so that we can report up to management about how the velocity of team is X or Y. It's to actually help the teams cultivate knowledge about what they could pull off in a given cycle, because the teams are actually more constant, I find, than the work. The work is actually quite variable, and depending on what feature you're working on, it could be a lot of different things. So we've kind of fallen back to more measuring the teams and what they could deliver and helping them kind of cultivate that.
Okay, so how does this affect recruitment? I mean, you know, with all your experiences, would you say that, you know, like you today are thinking differently how you recruit people compared to how you were thinking, you know, when earlier in your career?
Yeah, like I think it does affect recruitment quite a bit in terms of I look for, well, first of all, I look for people. I like having a mixed team. So I like having senior people on the team, but also junior people that ask a lot of questions and kind of challenge conventions. In terms of recruiting, we look for people that are just more kind of, you know, I don't want to say T-shaped, because that could come off as like really kind of arrogant in some ways, but just people that are kind of more willing to kind of know a little bit outside of their usual domain. And then for leaders, we actually look a lot for people that have very good kind of soft skills and are human in terms of, you know, they're not as product focused. They look more out. They look at the game as a whole. So they look at the product, but they also look at the people in the team as something that needs to be kind of nurtured and taken care of as well. Sometimes I say it's like game production these days is almost like, it's more like gardening than like building an assembly line. So especially when you're working with a team, so they all have to go through those journeys individually in their squads, but as a whole as well. And that's always really tricky.
That's interesting, you know, the gardening. I mean, does that also apply to process?
Yeah, it actually does. So in terms of process, some teams require kind of more guardrails to grow on and that sort of thing as they do things. And other teams don't require that as much, but yet you manage to stay on task and on focus. So I think it does apply to that as well. And yeah, sometimes you have to weed too, and that's more dealing with team dynamics and how people are working together and how they're achieving the goals together.
So I actually have a really tough question for you.
Okay.
You know, a lot of your thinking that we've been discussing today are what I would probably call quite modern, and the best teams right now are getting into this kind of thinking on how to, culture, how to build a good team, how to deliver. If you listen to some of my other podcast interviews, you will definitely hear some of that coming. Now, what about investors? I mean, are they on the train? I mean, do they understand, or they're like stuck in old ways of thinking? It's like, hey, you need more command and control, or do you feel like they're on board?
I mean, it depends on the investor, but I think for the most part, a team that is delivering something every 6 weeks or 2 months, even though I find it's hard for anybody who's outside of the game development process to really kind of evaluate a product that is in development. So they'll always focus on the graphics or something like that, right? But I think for the older school investors, it's probably not. They don't see the value in the outcomes as much. But for those that are a little bit more savvy and are into this kind of mindset, being able to kind of take the build and play it and say, hey, this is what we tried to push on for this release, and seeing that progress over a long period of time, excellence over time, that's where I think you build the confidence with leadership and investors and stakeholders.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. We're coming a little bit up on time, but there's one question I really want to ask you, because just talking to some of the people in the audience, just generally like who listens to this podcast, there's a lot of very senior talent, but there's also some very new talent. People that are still actually studying. I think when you and I started in the industry, there was not really any game development program at the universities specifically for becoming a producer. It's more like just learn to code really well.
Yeah.
But today there is, and we have many listeners here that are those guys. So from a career point of view, what would you advise the ones who are the aspiring producers of tomorrow on what to focus on, what's important?
Yeah, so I think for aspiring producers, if you're not someone that comes from a discipline, so whether it's engineering or design or art or QA or any of those kind of disciplines, that I think that's still very handy to come from one of those kind of areas to get some credibility with the team. And other than that, I think, the agile and all the methodologies it's kind of like programming languages. It's the fundamentals that matter. It's not really the specific application of things. And the other thing I would mentor more junior production types is really pay attention to kind of like leadership type things. So like read books like, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That's where I kind of see a lot of the gaps with the more junior people on our team. They're really kind of big on the methodologies and everything, but they kind of almost see the team like as a separate entity.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. It's been good talking with you, and nice to discuss also some of the tough challenges that has been and are going to continue to be, but I hope that we'll have less crisis driven development and less of the death marches, and that we're moving into a more healthy industry, and I think you're one of the people leading the way there, so that's great.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much. All right, take care.
All right, take care. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, you know what to do. Share it in your social media so more people can take part and learn. And one more thing, check out Favro Academy on favro.com for many more learnings. Thanks for tuning in.